In this episode, we talk about the reason why India is now increasing its engagement with the Taliban. We also talk about the launch of Mission Mausam and what it aims to do for India's weather forecasting. But first, we talk about the prevalence of rat hole mining in Assam and Meghalaya. Hi, I'm Shashank Bhargava, and you're listening to Three Things, the Indian Express news show. Last week in the Dima Hasao district of Assam, several workers were trapped inside what is known as a rat hole mine. These are coal mines spread across the region and were actually made illegal by the National Green Tribunal in 2014. But yet, they continue to operate due to a combination of factors, including weak enforcement and profitability. These mines, as we'll discuss later, are extremely dangerous to work in, especially now that they operate illegally. Now, the mine in question flooded in the early hours of the 6th of January. While a man named Rajiv Burman somehow managed to escape, 9 of his co-workers were trapped inside. By Saturday, rescue teams had recovered the bodies of 4 workers, while 5 others remain missing. To give us more details, we are joined by the Indian Express's Sukrita Baruah, who has been reporting on the case for the paper. Sukrita, can you first tell our listeners what do we mean when we say rat hole mining? What exactly that entails?
In this particular instance, I can describe the kind of mine and maybe that'll bring to, illustrate what this kind of work entails. So at this particular site, which is located in these coal reserves, which are there in Umrangso, the Umrangso region in Assam's Dima Hasao district. So this is a hill region which is contiguous with Meghalaya. And this particular practice that we're talking about has been prevalent in both Meghalaya and this Umrangso region. So this particular rat hole mine is like there's a pit. There's a deep pit which has been dug into the ground. That pit goes 310 feet deep. So basically this pit has been dug until coal has been struck. So 310 feet down coal was struck. And now from there at the bottom of the pit, there are multiple little tunnels branching out of it in different directions. So these tunnels are where workers kind of chip away at. They carry their pickaxes and they work inside these tunnels, mining out the coal which is there.
So these tunnels are what we are calling rat holes.
These tunnels are what are rat holes, and these are very, very low. So they are between 2 to 3 feet tall. They're a little wider than that. They're like a few more feet wide. So the workers, they chip away at the sides, basically. So when a worker goes in, obviously they can't stand. So they crouch. They either squat low or they crawl, and it's pitch dark. It is suffocating, of course. I had asked them, how do you see? Are you given helmets? Obviously, this is unauthorized, illegal work, right? But it continues to take place unauthorized, in an unauthorized, illegal and informal way, making an already hazardous activity even more hazardous, right? It's unregulated, it's informal, it's illegal. So quite a few workers at a time go in together. Their way is illuminated by a torch that they tie to their heads with a cloth. And I asked some of the workers, about any kind of safety gear. So they really don't have anything except for the helmet, and they wear whatever they're wearing. They carry pickaxe and a shovel with them to conduct the mining. And they take a little wooden trolley with them, a cart, which they fill out. And these workers are paid per cart that they fill out in a day. So around 200 rupees per cart by the Sardars or whoever the contractor is who is operating this mine. And they try and do around 10 to 15. So a rat hole is essentially that narrow, low tunnel that we're talking about, which is obviously a very perilous way for anyone to earn a living.
And you mentioned that they do 10 to 15 a day, so they're basically getting 2 to 3,000 rupees from this.
Yeah, so say around 3 workers go together. So they work collectively. 3 of them will load the cart collectively. What they earn for the day, they split between the 3 of them. And from the workers' perspective, this pays more than agricultural labor in their villages, which is why they travel and work under obviously perilous conditions. I mean, none of them are under the illusion that the work that they're doing does not carry risks. But they say that it pays better, which is why they undertake this work.
Okay, so there were 9 workers that got trapped inside this particular rat hole mine. Tell us, what do we know about how that happened?
So this incident took place last Monday. So it's been a week exactly now, on January 6th. So this kind of activity doesn't happen in monsoons because of the rains and because of water accumulation in the mines. So that particular day was actually the first day of this season in which mining had, this illegal activity had taken place for the year. So a lot of these workers are already there, like I said, workers come here seeking work. So they were there and they hadn't been working for quite a few. Some of them were there for 1.5 to 2 months waiting for work to begin. And the reason that work didn't begin was because there was water accumulated in the mine. There was water accumulated in different mines across the place. So the previous day on Sunday, some of the workers, went down, under the supervision of the contractor. And, the dewatering process had happened. So there were these water pumps which were sucking out water from the pit. And on Sunday, it seemed to have cleared out the water. So the water was removed. So the previous night, Sunday night, their supervisor told them, okay, tomorrow morning we can begin work. So work begins really early. Some of the workers go at 3:30, 4:30. So like I said, they go in groups, which is why it's very hard to understand exactly how many men had gone inside the mine, because each man can only speak for, okay, I went with three people who I shared a tent with. Okay, I went with 5 people. So they can only account for who went with them. And like I said, there are multiple tunnels and each of them can go in up to like 150 feet deep, 200 feet deep. So, they don't really know who else is there. They're just doing, and it's dark. So they just know who are with them. So, they had gone in that morning, like I said, first day of the season that they had entered the mine, and they were working. I have narratives from different people who were inside the mine and who survived. So they don't know exactly what happened, because they said that we were working inside, or, one of them said he was loading the coal into these boxes which are, carrying up the coal from the pit to above ground. And suddenly workers came running out of one of the rat holes, saying, this water gushing out. And it was a very rapid progression of events because the water apparently came with great force and it rapidly started filling up this tunnel.
Okay, so you have these really narrow underground spaces that were now flooding with water. What happens next, especially because there were just so many people working there?
So, workers have described this mad scramble that took place. So what happens is that, like I said, it's a 310-foot mine, and outside of it, there's a crane. And there are 2 boxes at any point of time in the mine. So the coal that is collected by the workers is put into one box, and the crane carries that up. And while that is going up and being deloaded, is being emptied, then they fill up another box. So there are 2 boxes. So these boxes were at the bottom of the mine. So workers started scrambling towards these. In the chaos, this lock, they call it the lock, basically the connector between the crane's pulley chain and the box, fell into the water, lost. So there was, even that route kind of was not possible. So then, workers say they clung to whatever they could and they held on to, the chain of the crane that was coming down. And in the chaos that followed, some of the other workers who were above ground heard. So they started pulling them up with the chain, but they were just holding on to the chain with their bare hands. So around 10-15 workers just holding on to the chain. But there was a jerk and all of them fell. Only 2 of them continued. So these 2 men, they got out of the pit initially, and then the people outside, they found an old and broken box, but they managed something. They attached it to the crane, they sent it down. So over around 4 such trips, don't have the exact numbers, but approximately around 25 to 27 men got into that box and they got out. But the water was rapidly filling. So by the end of this, there were at least 9 men who couldn't make it.
Right, and the other thing to note is that this is actually a very hard place to get to. And so initially, like you said, the rescue efforts were actually carried out by the workers themselves. And it was only the next morning that the army came, the NDRF came, and the state DRF came. And by then you write that the water had reached some 200 feet. Talk about how challenging it was for the rescuers to get to the people that were trapped.
Incredibly difficult. So I had the chance to speak to some of the divers who found the first body. So like I said, there's a central pit and the water at that time was around 100 feet deep, and the divers say it's pitch dark. So when they enter the water, they can't see anything. They can just feel around with their hands. So on the first day of diving operations, the divers went in and they could only explore one half. So, like I said, there's a base at the bottom, right? So half of it they felt around in. And on Wednesday morning, on the first dive of the day, one of the divers just felt the body with his hand. So for all of that day on Wednesday, there were more search operations. On Thursday, there was yet another search operation. But they had explored the entire central pit of the mine, but there were no other bodies there. So obviously the bodies were inside these tunnels branching out, but the divers can't enter those. They're too narrow. They can't go in with their equipment, and it's not safe. Like, the risk far outweighs anything else. So though they were conducting, it was kind of like groping in the dark, And the most crucial part of the rescue operations actually were the removal of the water, so dewatering of this pit, so that you can access more of the mine. But these efforts for many days were proving futile, because initially there were just these 2 motorized pumps that were there at the site, and they were pumping out water, but the flow of water was constant, so whatever they would pump out would get refilled, so the water would stay level at around 100 feet.
And where was this water coming from? Was it coming from underground?
So now they still don't know what the source of the water is. So I spoke to the Chief Executive Officer of the Assam State Disaster Management Authority, and he said that there are 2 possibilities that are being considered. So obviously this water source was activated, while the mining was happening. Something got breached during that time. So one theory is that there was rainwater collected underground somewhere, and during the mining that got breached and water was coming in. So he said that is a more manageable situation, because that water will, at some point of time, it has to finish. The reserve has to get over. The other is that, there are multi-layer groundwater tables in this region, is what the officer told me. And he said that maybe one of these has changed its course and is now moving in this direction, which he said is more challenging because, the water is not going to get exhausted. So those 2 motors which were there were obviously not working. So then they got in another pump, a more heavy-duty pump from OMGC. Now in this case, the problem was that it was not submersible. So then they got a very heavy-duty pump from Coal India Limited from Nagpur. It was airlifted. So that was deployed, and there seemed to have been some kind of fruits that were yielded from this effort, because on Saturday, the water level fell from around 30 meters to first 15 meters and then 12 meters. And because, the water level was now changing, 3 more bodies were found on Saturday. So with that, the bodies started coming out, and one of the officials said that because enough time had passed, the bodies kind of rose, they became lighter and rose to the surface. So as of now, 4 bodies have been recovered. 5 more are unaccounted for. Of course, there's very little chance. There's basically no chance of anyone being rescued alive. But yeah, the efforts are still on to recover these bodies.
Now, Sukrita, this incident has obviously made a lot of headlines. It has also led to a bit of a political slugfest in the state. You have the opposition party, the Congress party, basically targeting the ruling government over it. Could you talk about what are some of the things that it has been saying?
So the first question that everyone asked, right, when this incident happened was, what was this mine? What was its status? Because considerable number of mines in this Umrangso coal reserves are leased by the AMDC, basically, which is a state-run enterprise. So there are a large number of authorized mines over here. So the initial question was this one of those mines where this took place? But the Chief Minister announced that this seems to be an illegal mine, not one of the authorized mines. And they arrested an individual named Punish Nunisa at the beginning. And then later the Chief Minister said that this was a mine that was initially run by the AMDC, but it was abandoned around 12 years ago. So the mine itself was not illegal, but the operation that was conducted was illegal. So these people, illegally took workers down to enter. So another individual has been arrested now as well, Abdul Ghanan Laskar. So 2 people arrested for this thing. So opposition parties have kind of alleged that these 2 people are scapegoats, because what they are alleging is that it's not possible for an operation like this to take place without any kind of state sanction or, without local authorities being aware of. And also because there have been several mining incidents, not maybe of this scale, but small incidents happen here in Upper Assam, where there are also coal reserves. There's a lot of illegal mining that takes place. So opposition parties have called this a failure of the state government, asking why the ban on this kind of mining has not been enforced, and also alleging that not only, is there weak enforcement, but also complicity in this, because it is an extremely lucrative and profitable business that's happening here.
Right, and this is a more generalized criticism, but the party has also blamed the chief executive member of the Dima Hasao Autonomous Council. Can you tell us a bit about that?
So Dima Hassa, which is where this mine is located, is a tribal majority district, and its governance structure is a little different because it's a 6th schedule area. So it has an autonomous council which has, elected and nominated members, and it is currently held by the BJP, and its chief executive member is Debolal Garlosa, who is a militant turned politician. So these parties have alleged that, he and his family have been carrying out illegal mining operations in this area, which is, that ecosystem is what led to an incident such as this. And also, they've pointed to links between Punish Nunisa and Debolal Gorlosa. So some district level Congress workers did even file a police complaint naming Gorlosa and his wife, but it hasn't been registered. So I just want to make that clear. It's a police complaint at this point. The chief ministers kind of shrugged this off when reporters asked him about Gorlosa's name appearing here. He said that, I quote, "It's a human tragedy. Let's not politicize this." And he said that Gorlosa's name hasn't come up in the police investigation. And I did speak to Gorlosa too. So he called it a political attack, saying that, look at where the complaint is coming from. These are Congress members. So this is a political attack. He said that there is an inquiry already happening. We are not stopping that. So, right, there is a swirl of allegations and quite a, heated political war of words here, which, of course, has been rebutted, denied by both the state government and the Autonomous Council.
And next we talk about the Taliban. Last week, Foreign Secretary Vikram Misri met the Afghanistan Acting Foreign Minister Amir Khan Muttaqi in Dubai in what was India's first high-level bilateral engagement with the Taliban regime. So far, an Indian official at the level of Joint Secretary had been meeting Taliban ministers. But Misri's meeting is an upgrade, which signals a step forward in India's engagement with the Islamist fundamentalist group currently ruling Afghanistan. When we spoke to the Indian Express's diplomatic affairs editor Shubhajit Roy, he explained the reasons behind the move.
Yeah, I think it's the fact that, Taliban is a reality after 3.5 years of capturing power in Afghanistan. When President Ashraf Ghani fled the country and the government of Afghanistan under Ghani, it collapsed. After 3.5 years, it's now a reality that Taliban is here to stay. And there are regional players like China, which is entering the vacuum, which has been left by the US after its withdrawal, and the West is also not present there. So in this kind of situation where the Chinese are making inroads in Afghanistan, India possibly decided that, it was high time that India should start official level engagement with the Taliban regime. So it was a very structured bilateral meeting. It was not as if both the Taliban regime's foreign minister and the Indian foreign secretary were there for some conference or some multilateral summit or some other sort of meeting, and then they had a meeting on the sidelines. It was a planned meeting in Dubai where both of them could meet, and both of them were accompanied by senior officials from both sides.
And Shubhajit, what do we know about what all was discussed during this meeting, and especially the kind of concerns that India raised during the meeting?
Yeah, so for India, the core concern is terrorism from Afghan soil, and the Indian readout said that Taliban, they conveyed their understanding of the Indian concerns when it comes to security. And that is the paramount sort of concern for India, that Indian interests, Indian embassy, Indian officials should not be targeted when they are in Afghanistan. And that was sort of assured by the Taliban foreign minister and his team. So that was one of the major points of conversation, discussion between the two sides in the meeting. Apart from that, the Indian side said that They were ready to give more humanitarian assistance, say, be it in health sector, be it in food, in other areas as well. And to supply those things, it is also ready to use the Chabahar port to supply those, materials.
Right, and when it came to the demands of the other side, you write that the Taliban spoke about trade and issuing visas. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so the Taliban side essentially was very keen that India grants visas for Afghan students, for Afghan people who wants to come to India for medical treatment, and also for Afghan businessmen. As Afghan health infrastructure is in a very bad shape, and that has been an issue for the new Taliban regime because many of the skilled professionals, the doctors, they left after the Taliban took over. They left the country. And India used to be a favored destination for Afghan patients who want to come here for the medical treatment because it was cost effective, it was good. And in the last 3.5 years, they were going to Pakistan because India was not granting them visas because of its security concerns. So now that the relationship between Pakistan and Afghanistan has soured, so Afghans are now, the Taliban is looking at India as a destination once again, and it wants its people to not suffer and wants to access the Indian medical system. So that was one of the major sort of asks, major requests by the Taliban delegation. Apart from that, also there are a lot of Afghan students who want to come here to study. Some were already in the middle of their program when their program it got discontinued because they were stranded there in Afghanistan and they couldn't come back to continue their course. So a lot of Afghans want to study here, want to continue their higher education here. And of course, there is this business. They want to trade, they want with India. Right now, there are a handful of people who come here regularly for trade, and mostly those are dry fruits and textiles. They take back clothes and stuff and shoes from here. But the Afghans want it to be increased by volume. So that is another area of request that the Taliban made during the meeting.
And Shubhajit, one of the things that India has expressed concerns about when it comes to the Taliban are women's rights and minority rights. Were those discussed during this meeting?
Well, not according to the official statement that were put out by India or put out by Afghanistan. In both the readouts, the reference to women's rights or minority rights were missing. So that is something that is curious because India had always maintained that it wants the Taliban to respect women's rights, especially when it comes to women's education, because the Taliban has been following a medieval era sort of practice of not allowing girls to go to schools, attend education. Also, there have been restrictions on women in public life, in public spaces, in workspaces. So India has been very vocal, especially since August of 2021. But it was, very odd to see the Indian or the Taliban foreign ministry readouts not mention about India raising that issue at all. Same holds true for the minority rights, which India had also raised during those months after Taliban captured power, because there were Afghan Hindus, Afghan Sikhs. But of course, many of them, most of them, they left Afghanistan and came to India. If you remember, they came in batches with Guru Granth Sahib, and they came to India and were received by, in fact, Indian cabinet ministers, if you remember. But curiously enough, that particular issue was not also mentioned in the readout. We don't know if it was raised or not, but definitely it has not been publicly articulated in the official statements about the discussions and the meeting.
Shubhajit, you mentioned in your piece that there has not yet been a move to grant official recognition to the Taliban government by India. Could you tell us what officially recognizing the Taliban government would involve?
Well, an official recognition would mean that India would have to accept Taliban's flag, which is different from the Afghan Republic's flag. It has to accept Taliban's appointees as an ambassador in India, which is not the case right now. And there is a whole protocol, there is a whole procedure involved in that. Now, most countries in the world have not recognized Taliban as legitimate government, but many have started dealing with the Taliban regime as a figure of authority, as the people in charge. So China, in fact, has posted an ambassador, and it has also received the Taliban ambassador. Some countries in Central Asian region have also started posting diplomats or accepting Taliban diplomats. Russia has also moved towards that particular process. So India has also moved towards engaging with Taliban at the highest level, at the official level possible. But so far it has stopped short of granting recognition to Taliban because Taliban wants legitimacy for the regime. But this is being seen as a leverage by the international community that if they want legitimacy, they have to abide by the rules of the modern times of the 21st century when it comes to human rights, when it comes to women's rights or minority rights or an inclusive government.
And in the end, we talk about Mission Mausam. Established in 1875, the India Meteorological Department completes 150 years of service today. To mark this occasion, Prime Minister Narendra Modi yesterday inaugurated Mission Mausam, which aims to upgrade the capabilities of India's weather department in forecasting, modeling and dissemination.
भविष्य में भारत मौसम की हर परिस्थिति के लिए तैयार रहे, भारत एक क्लाइमेट स्मार्ट राष्ट्र बने, इसके लिए हमने मिशन मौसम भी लॉन्च किया है। मिशन मौसम सस्टेनेबल फ्यूचर और फ्यूचर रेडीनेस को लेकर भारत की प्रतिबद्धता का भी प्रतीक है। साथियों,
Now, to be able to increase the capabilities of IMD, the mission will have a budget of 2,000 crore rupees for the first 2 years of its implementation. Last year, the Indian Express's Amitabh Sinha had broken the story for the paper, and he told us that this money would be used to improve localized forecasts and predict extreme weather events.
Now, these two areas, they are the weaknesses in IMD's capability. Also, because of disasters, disasters are not just in terms of loss of life and property, there are a huge economic drain as well, right? And there are causing major disruptions. So if your rail network or your, road network gets cut off, then supplies are hampered. There are security implications if these things happen. Say, supposing the chicken's neck is cut off for a few days, and then you have all kinds of problems happening because of this. So reliable weather forecast is becoming much, much more important now than, say, it was 10 years ago.
Now, in order to make better predictions, he says the IMD will increase its network of observation instruments and invest in better computing capabilities.
So all these different layers where you set up the observation network and collect data, the second part is then you have to have the computing power. And then the third power is that whatever the data comes, you have to have the models and the understanding of what this kind of data would lead to in terms of a weather event. Now, all those three things need upgradation, and that's what will happen. Also, what needs a little bit of big breakthrough is required in terms of getting the models right, which are India-specific models, which take into account climate change scenarios, and they take in a lot of data from the Indian region itself. Then, there's a lot that needs to be done on the climate change side separately as well in terms of research, in terms of assessing climate change impacts over the Indian region itself. Right now, the IPCC reports that are the most reliable information about climate change impacting the Earth, they are mostly global models. They talk about Earth as a whole, what's going to be the impact on the Earth as a whole, but you also need to have impacts over small areas. What kind of impacts would climate change have over India, or whether over Eastern India or over Western India? So for that, lots of studies, lots of research would need to be done. so that we have much more granular information about these things.
You were listening to 3 Things by the Indian Express. Today's show was written and produced by me, Shashank Bhargava, and was edited and mixed by Suresh Pawar. If you like the show, then do subscribe to us wherever you get your podcasts. You can also recommend the show to someone you think will like it, share it with a friend or someone in your family. It's the best way for people to get to know about us. You can tweet us at Express Podcasts and write to us at podcasts@indianexpress.com.